Today we're going to look at some growth and development. Now this is definitely not going to take the place of growth and development over the lifespan, which is generally a class you need for nursing, but it is just to give you a general idea of some basic principles on growth and development of a client or a patient. So when we're referring to growth, that's your physical changes. It's how you change in height and weight and your appearance and your body functions. So when you see, a child growing quickly or they're putting on more weight or they're growing more inches, and then when we get to adulthood, we don't notice it quite as much, even though our body is still actually changing. That's what we're referring to as the growth of the physical changes. We're also looking at, when we talk about development, we're talking about the changes in mental, emotional, and social function. How does a person behave and think? And there's generally, like with children, we see kind of milestones of what's the norm. What do most children reach at a certain age level? And that's what we're referring to as development. So in infancy, from birth to 1 year of age, there's a lot of developmental tests that are happening with kids. They're learning how to walk. They start eating solid foods. So usually they start out being breastfed or bottle fed. And then, after a few months, they start taking a few bites of blenderized food. They learn how to start talking and communicating with their caregivers. They develop trust relationships, emotional relationships with the people caring for them. And hopefully they start developing some stable sleep patterns and feeding patterns. Their head is predominantly large. So when you look at a child, they tend to be top heavy. So as an adult, our center of gravity is usually in our lumbar region, in our lower back. But for a child, it's actually up in the thoracic region. So because their heads are proportionally very large for the rest of their body. And so they tend to be very top heavy. And, that's worth noting because if you do have a little kid, it's one of the reasons why they say even a bucket of water a child can drown in. They bend over to look in it and if they pitch forward and their head falls in, they can't always get themselves back out. Their abdomen is generally large, round, and soft, and they can usually see fairly well, up to 8 inches, and they can hear good. They react to touch and pain, and they have a good sense of taste and smell. Now, usually kids sleep around 16 to 18 hours a day, but unfortunately not always when you want it to be. It's generally how that works. And there are certain reflexes that they're born with. So one of the reflexes is called a Moro reflex or a startle reflex. If you have a child, a little baby in your arms, and you just kind of act like you're going to drop it, they just kind of throw their arms out and have this startled expression. And that is something that they are innately born with. There's what we call the tonic neck reflex. So if you just brush along the side of a cheek for a baby, they will automatically turn their head that way. And if you stick something in a baby's hand, they will just automatically grasp it. That's called the grasp reflex. And then your step reflex, if you just hold a little baby up, they just automatically start moving their feet. Some people call it a dance reflex or a step reflex. So they are reflexes that a baby is normally just automatically has. They're born with it. So it is something that physicians, when they are checking, after a baby is born and they start checking them out and they're looking for certain reflexes, these are some of the things that they'll be looking at. So then we get to toddlerhood, which we consider from 1 to 3 years of age. And as far as, they're growing fairly quickly, their weight, they're growing in height, they're adding weight onto the body. Developmentally, they're tolerating separation at this point. So they're learning how to be a little bit more independent, and unfortunately, they are trying to assert their independence, which is one of the reasons why we call this the terrible twos. It's a time where everything is me, 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 me. They don't understand and really grasp the concepts of how what they're doing impacts the rest of the family or other people. It's just how does everything revolve around them. They start learning bowel and bladder control. So usually around 2 years of age, give or take, 6 months or so, kids are usually start doing bowel and bladder training. They're using much more, they have a much better word vocabulary, and they're starting to communicate better. Less dependent, they're starting to walk well, and their coordination is really increasing at this point. I thought this was cute. Wizard of Oz is a toddler and mom saying why, and it's because. Kids do things that interest them, and again, they just don't really quite understand the concepts of what they do and how it impacts other people yet. Everything is very egocentric. It's all how it revolves around them. So then we get to preschool age. And with preschoolers, we're talking 3 to 6 years of age. Their body is thinning out. They become more coordinated. They're more graceful in movements. They're growing in height. They're still putting on some weight. Um, Communication is increasing tremendously at this point. They usually have an incredible vocabulary at this point. They can generally perform their own self-care. They're learning about gender differences and developing sexual modesty at this point. But here's the age where they're really starting to learn right from wrong. So in that, terrible two phase, really the concepts of what they're doing, how it's wrong, is really a difficult concept for them to grasp. Here at this preschool age, they're really starting to understand those concepts. They're learning to play with others, and they're developing their family relationships more. So then we get to school age, and that's it's from 6 to 9, 6 to 10, somewhere in there. Developmental tasks, their social and physical skills are improving. They're starting to do gender-appropriate behaviors. They're learning basic reading, writing, and arithmetic skills. They are developing a sense of a conscience. They have morals. Their ethical behavior is starting to really show at this point, and they are developing their own self-esteem. Late childhood, that 9 or so to about 12 years of age, there's more refinement and maturity in achieving these tasks. They are very independent. They've developed friendships. They understand social roles of one's sex. They're developing moral and ethical behavior. They're developing greater muscular strength, coordination, balance. They're learning how to study. And you guys, if you have kids, you really want to teach them good study habits. It's going to hold them throughout the rest of their life. Girls tend to have growth spurts much faster than boys do, so girls are usually going through a growth spurt at this age, where boys don't usually hit it for a couple more years. Their movements are much more coordinated, muscle strength, physical skills increase, fine motor skills are good, their math and language abilities have increased, and they're getting to the onset of puberty is nearing. And I will tell you, we used to say puberty would hit, usually around 11 to 15, and then we were saying 10 to 13, and now we're seeing it start at 9, 9 to 15, anywhere in that range. But puberty is the part where the reproductive organs are beginning to function and secondary sex characteristics are starting to appear. And kids need factual sex education. So I'm going to tell you right now, one of my jobs I used to have was to go out to the schools and teach health-related issues to the kids in school. And sex ed was a really common thing I was asked to do in middle school. If you do not teach these kids factual information, they are going to learn a lot of incorrect information from their peers. And if you're thinking that they aren't interested in it, or they don't need to know it at this point, I'm going to tell you from what I learned being in middle schools, they need factual sex education, and they need it at that age. They truly do. They prefer friends usually of the same sex at this age, but they're starting to be interested in the opposite sex. They are unfortunately aware of mistakes and faults of adults. Up to now, they're usually, parents are wonderful, adults know everything, and it's about this age that they realize that we really don't. Parents and children frequently disagree, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's good to teach a child how to have a difference of opinion, but how to express it in a respectful way. Kids that are never taught how to have a disagreement with another person, they tend to try it out for the first time with a cop, or in a poor surroundings where they are in a safe environment. So teaching children to have their own opinion, but to be respectful with it when they have a disagreement, and how to have a disagreement in a polite, respectful fashion is truly something that we need to help our children learn. Parents are needed for child development. They're starting to not think they need their parents, but they still need their parents for child development. And unfortunately, at this age, bullying becomes very, very common at school. It's just a very common thing to happen in the school systems. When they hit the adolescence age, 12 to 18, it's that time between puberty and adulthood, and we're having a rapid growth period again. where your height and weight tends to grow tremendously. Physical, sexual, emotional, and social changes are happening throughout the body and to the person. And so part of what they're having to learn is how to accept those changes in their appearance, how to develop relationships, how to start becoming independent from parents and adults. And even though that's a sad thing, it's one of the things that it's our job to teach our kids to be independent, to learn how to become an independent, healthy adult. And so these are some of the things that they're starting to learn how to work on. And even though, again, they don't feel like they need their parents for this, they still need that caregiver. They still need, someone to help role model that for them and help them guide them through this. They are preparing for marriage and family life. They're thinking about it. Do they want it? What do they want? What do they want to do for a career? What would they have to do to get that career? Their morals, their ethical behavior is really getting more pronounced at this point, and their attitudes and their values needed to function in society are really developing at this point. So the menstrual cycle, menarche, that's your onset of puberty in girls, and that's the first menstrual cycle. And pregnancy, of course, can occur at this point. Secondary sex characteristics appear like breast development, pubic hair. For boys, when they're going through puberty, it's usually ejaculation, the release of semen, which signals onset of puberty in boys. Nocturnal emissions or wet dreams occur. Men obviously can father, or boys actually still at this point can father children, and they're starting to get facial hair, pubic hair, that deepening voice. They need to learn how to be independent, but they still need guidance in that process. They prefer peers. They tend to starting to show or feel a sexual orientation at this point. Appearance is very important to them. And they start, like I said, they're thinking about careers. What do they need to do to achieve that career? Their parents, their peers, their culture, their religion, media, it's all going to influence them in a lot of these decisions that they're making. I really liked this. I thought it was cute. It says you can't begin to imagine how embarrassing it is to be seen with you. So my daughter, when she was 15 years old, I used to have to drop her off at high school, and she never wanted me to be seen with me at that age. So I had to drop her off down the street from the school, or go past the school and park a little bit up, and I'd drop her off, and she go into class. I mean, it's not like I ever tried to purposely embarrass her, and I never hey, make good choices. I never did that to her. But anyway, I would always drop her off, and she'd walk a half block up to her school. So one time I was getting ready to drop her off, and right in front of the school, one of her classmates or another student got hit on its bicycle. He was riding his bicycle and got hit by a car. So I just kind of pulled my car over to the side. I throw it in park, told my daughter, bye, see you later, and I ran over to see if this kid needs help. And so I'm over there, with the kid, and the ambulance comes. Kid was fine, but they take him in to get him checked out. And by now the bell's already rung and the kids are off in school. And I get back in my car and I go off to work. So that afternoon when I pick my daughter up and we get home, she goes, Mom, we have to talk about this morning. And I was like, okay. And she goes, and I'm thinking, I don't know what I was thinking. I was thinking maybe she's going to say like, oh, Mom, that was so cool that you could help my friend, or, that's so neat that you're a nurse, Mom, and that you could help people. What she started with was, oh my God, Mom, I've never been so embarrassed in my entire life. She goes, I so hope nobody knows that you were my mother. And I was like, I'm just looking at her like she's grown horns or something. It's like, well, you got to be kidding. I said, I was just able to help this kid, and you're embarrassed by me? And she's like, Mom, she goes, when you bent over, she goes, I was wearing scrubs that day. And she goes, when you bent over, your scrubs scooted down and this much of your underwear was showing. Oh my God, I was just so humiliated, Mom. I just hope nobody knew you were my mother. The things kids focus on. My daughter and I now are actually friends now, as well as being mother and daughter. But I'll tell you, when she was 15, I didn't think we were going to survive together. Young adulthood, 18 to 40. Okay, and mental and social development is continuing, but there's little physical growth. So that's a big long range of age. You're talking for about 20 years. You don't physical changes are still happening. Physical changes are going to continually happen throughout your lifespan, but you don't always notice them then because they're fairly subtle. And so it's more the developmental tasks of this age of choosing an education. What career path are we going to go? What education do we need for that career path? Selecting a partner and learning how to live with that partner, becoming a parent, deciding if you want kids, how to raise those kids, developing a satisfactory sex life. There's a lot of developmental functions that are happening at this point. And then middle adult, 40 to 65, is usually generally more stable and comfortable. People are usually established in their career, though a lot of people at this age, nowadays, back when I was growing up, it's like parents stayed in the same career their entire life. But it's more common nowadays for people after 10 or 15 years to say, hey, I'm tired of this. Let's do something different. Go back to school and learn a new career. Nothing wrong with that. But as a general rule at this age, most people are a little bit more stable financially. They're usually kind of, gotten their career goals taken care of. So now they're starting to adjust to physical changes as the body's starting to age. They have grown children. And a lot of times we call this the sandwich generation because they're still trying to get their kids in high school, finish raising them, and yet they have aging parents that they're having to help with. And they're kind of sandwiched between those two generations. They're starting to think of leisure activities. If we're going to retire soon, what am I going to do with my retirement? I thought this was really cute. My kids used to love Mutant Ninja Turtles, and so I found this middle-aged Mutant Ninja Turtles of their burping and backaches and poor eyesight. Unfortunately, all things that tend to happen as we get older. So children leave home, so hobbies and pastimes, people are starting to develop those to fill in that empty time. Many, like I said, will still have responsibility for aging parents. And unfortunately, many middle-aged adults are going to have to deal with the death of their parents at this point. So physical changes can include energy and endurance slowing, metabolism and physical activity slow, facial wrinkles and gray hair, eyesight changes, hearing loss. Women tend to go through menopause at this point, and diseases and illnesses can start to develop. And then we get late adulthood, 65 years and older. And generally, there are physical changes at this point. The skin is starting to dry out, more wrinkles, eyesight is decreasing, sense of taste and smell can decrease. So there are a lot of physical things that are happening to the body. Developmentally, we have decreased strength and loss of health. Retirement. And retirement a lot of times means a reduced income. If you haven't planned for retirement well, when people retire, a lot of times they cannot continue to live the lifestyle that they've had. They're coping with a partner's death. They may have to develop new friends and new relationships because they've had so many deaths in their friendship circle, and they're starting to think about their own mortality, their own potential death at this point. So we are going to be looking at, we're going to actually look at the body systems and physiology next, and then we're going to look at what's normal as to how it compares to as a person gets older, how they age, how they change. That will be our next subject. So we'll stop here.